Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined in this episode by Seamus McMenamin, the Sheep Sector Manager with Bord Bia, to discuss the current trends and outlook for the sheep market in the coming months. Since spring, Seamus explains the impact reopening has had on land consumption, both domestic and on international markets, as well as the trends in international trade. We move on to discuss the prospects for the lamb and ewe trade over the coming weeks and months. And finally, we discuss the potential market for organic lamb and some of the challenges that both organic and conventional lamb trade could face going forward. We start off, however, with Seamus discussing the current trade and throughput this year to date.
The quotes today are about 630 to 640 for your lambs, and then the bones for the QA on top of that. The trade has been coming under pressure, I suppose, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but it's shown sort of signs of stabilising now. As supply and demand sort of come into sort of kilter with each other. We did see sort of peak production just in the run up to Eid al-Adha, and these Muslim festivals have become a very important part of the sheep farming calendar. And then just in the follow on from that, then we've seen some downward pressure on the trade, but we also had tighter numbers coming forward for slaughter. Just I suppose just with the way it fell, men were weaning lambs and things like that. So we've seen a reduction in the kill. Now the kill numbers have started to pick up a wee bit in the last few weeks, but I suppose the key thing is if we look at the spring lamb kill this year and we compare it to this time last year, you're talking about 60,000 extra lambs that are still in the system, even compared to last year. So I suppose that's why we would encourage sort of producers to keep lambs moving when they're ready. I suppose it's been a strange year for growing grass, and then with maybe people trying to cut back on the amount of feed that they're feeding. It just means that lambs haven't been coming fit for slaughter maybe as quick as possible, and as normal, as they would in normal years. And I suppose you're probably talking lambs are finishing about 2 weeks later or thereabouts than typically. But overall, I suppose numbers wise, we've seen more ewes in the system at the start of the year. And it was a fairly good lambing, so I would suspect that there's a good few lambs still in the system to come out.
Look, it's very likely, Seamus, that is a reflection of cost and or a reduction in the amount of concentrate going in the farms. That's going to probably have a bit of a knock-on impact for later in the year. We might come back to that in a moment. Just in terms of the lambs that have been slaughtered, look, we've seen that bump in price a couple of weeks ago. Probably crushed out a lot of lambs, or possibly lambs a slightly lighter carcass. Has the carcass weight changed much, or is there any issues with lighter lambs, maybe slightly underfinished lambs going in at the moment?
The average carcass weight is back slightly, and as you say, there's been reports of lambs maybe killing out not as well as people would expect. I suppose just with the lack of creep feeding, maybe in the strength not in the grass, but the factories have reported more underfinished lambs, and I've also been speaking to people in other parts of the UK and Northern Ireland, and it's a very similar system where sort of outcome there, where you see more lambs coming in at a 1 and a very low 2, whereas obviously they prefer a 2 and a 3. So I suppose it's just about selecting lambs and just being sure to handle them before you put them forward for slaughter, making sure there's enough cover on them. So I think where the carcass weight's not so much of an issue, it's more of the cover on the carcasses that's creating a few problems at processing.
It's that level of finish on them. So look, again, you covered it there. Ensuring you're handling correctly, not only targeting the weight. No, just maybe before we move off, kind of what's happened this year. Look, it's been another year where the hogget trade carrying in really underpinned that trade for the first 2 quarters. Probably maybe even a little bit later, Seamus, than in previous seasons.
Yeah, there was about 160,000 extra hoggets carried into this year compared to last year. It's probably more of a return to maybe normal trading conditions. So no, that did help keep supplies running through the plants. And I suppose this year, as I've touched on already, the spring lamb numbers were slow enough to come forward. So the hoggets did account for a larger amount of the kill, and were welcomed, especially in around Easter, and to sort of keep the throughput going in the plants. There was more of a carryover. I suppose we would expect similar numbers to be carried into next year, just with the prospects of a larger lamb crop. We would expect similar numbers to be carried into 2023.
That and the extra lambs maybe not put through the system. Look, the other maybe highlight from earlier in the year is we've seen ewe trade kind of peaking certainly in the live trade, it was probably a lot better than previous years. It'll probably be something else affecting producers at the moment. There's more ewes going to be shifted off in the next couple of months. How has that fared up for while other years?
I suppose if you actually look at the throughput in terms of what we've killed, it's only up slightly compared to the other years. But I suppose if you touched on there, the live trade has been a lot more active, and there's probably about 20,000 extra ewes have gone to the UK via Northern Ireland. So no, a very good trade. I suppose what's killed here usually goes out in carcass form, mostly to Italy and the UK, and then lives obviously going to the UK. But no, it's definitely helped keep a very strong trade under the ewe trade and give a good return for farmers. So the one thing that I have heard is that there was a lot of ewe lambs processed or passed through the plants in around Easter time. So it'll be interesting to see what availability we have of quality hoggets, coming into this breeding season.
It could certainly affect us. So I suppose the price was there, the premium was there on them, and they capitalised on it. Look, if we maybe just move to the markets, look, since the last time we've talked, everything has opened up again. Has that had an impact on domestic consumption? Maybe we'll talk about the more international markets then, but have you seen any changes this year in the first couple of months of how consumption has been affected?
It's very hard to get figures or a handle on, what goes out through food service. But from the retail perspective, anyway, the very high prices has had an impact on consumption. We're talking maybe like a close to 20% decline in volume and value of lamb sales just for the year end in June there. Some of that is because people are eating less at home and they're eating more out or whatever. But the high price is definitely a factor. I suppose we're in times of inflation, and lamb is the most expensive protein. So I suppose it hasn't been negatively impacted by that as well. I suppose from a Bord Bia perspective, where we've continued to operate our domestic rates, our domestic promotional campaigns, telling people to look for the quality mark and highlighting sort of the versatility of lamb as a protein, and to sort of counteract some of that decline. But in terms then, if we move to the export markets, I suppose globally there continues to be a fairly tight lamb supply situation. We've seen Australia increase production and New Zealand decline, so one sort of balances the other out. And in terms of what coming into the sort of Europe and from Australia and New Zealand, it's running slightly higher for the first round of the year, but like nothing remarkably increased. Sort of a return to more normal levels,
Has there been a bit of a shift in that? Has it been redirected more towards China or other markets, or is the EU still a focus for them?
Well, I suppose in the last 2 or 3 years they've used less than half of their quota in terms of what they can send to us. Tariff-free, so there's definitely been a redirection towards China and the US and sort of the Middle East and North Africa. Like China would have been sort of taking up to 50% of New Zealand and Australian exports. And that's actually come back a wee bit in recent times. I suppose we've got COVID issues and inflation problems in China. But the product has been redirected to the US and the Middle East and North Africa, really, because there's a good return for the lamb there. And then I suppose there's very high shipping costs for it to get to Europe. The one thing we have seen, however, is there has been an increase in the volume of Australian lamb that's gone into the UK, which I suppose then releases a bit more of their product for export onto the market. I suppose the UK has seen a 30% increase in what it's exported this year compared to last year. So I suppose they're our biggest competition in the EU market. So I suppose that's the one thing to keep in mind, that there is more UK product available to compete against us in Europe, maybe than we've seen in the last couple of years.
Like just on that, as we head into the latter 2 quarters of the year, when a lot of the UK lamb, the more hours will be coming on stream, will that have a bit of an impact on it, Seamus, or is there still sufficient capacity in the EU market to swallow up both?
Yeah, well, there's still demand there, and I suppose the volume of product that's expected to come in from Australia and New Zealand isn't expected to increase this year. So while there'll be some more extra UK product about, you'll not have sort of the international products coming in. And I suppose there will be availability and there will be demand, but I suppose no different than our domestic market. I suppose consumers across Europe are facing inflation and the higher price point of lamb. So while there will be demand, I suppose that impact of potentially reduced consumption. I know the EU have forecasted 2% or just under a 2% reduction in lamb consumption this year, and that is as a result of the less EU imports, and then the impacts of inflation and consumer choice.
Over increased costs. Look, when I have you crystal ball gaze, and you touched on this earlier, like we talked before previously as well about the importance of that store trade, that hogget trade coming in the spring. Just forward gazing, we're starting to see stores coming on market at the moment. For those thinking about the prospects of that for this year, no major change forecast, Seamus? Is it sailing as usual, or do you see any blip in it?
There's no, I suppose the biggest impact of the global trade is I suppose Australia and New Zealand, and the volume of product that they have in the world market. So when you balance those two out, there's not expected to be any increase in the global sheep meat production. So that should keep a flow under the trade. The outlook would be fairly positive, but I suppose that's dependent on consumer demand and the demand then from the export markets.
Okay, so not major crop. Look, just maybe to finish up with you, I know you're just back from trade mission in Germany, and so one of the things you were looking at was the future for organics. It's something that's topical at the moment. Maybe just if you can give us a little bit of insight, what's the kind of demand for organic sheep meat like, or likely to be going forward?
I suppose at the minute we export probably about 25% of organic lamb, or even more, maybe ends up in Germany. So it's a very interesting market. There is growing demand for organic lamb and beef and lamb in the market. But I suppose similar to yourselves, there's inflation in the market. They're talking about 12% food inflation, and that does impact the consumer's choice. It's a very different setup to our sort of retail. We go to retail here, we see maybe like the odd organic product, but not much. But over there, it could be like 15-20% of a conventional retailer is organic produce. And there's also then just dedicated organic stores. And an awful amount of organic produce is sold through own label as well. So no, there's definite demand in the market, and it'll just be how we place ourselves in that market and the price the consumer is willing to pay. But no, there's definitely growing demand for organic produce in Europe, and I suppose the consumer wants their credentials to come along with organic accreditation. But I suppose it's just about getting the right placement in the market and making the most of the opportunities available.
Well, it's a potential for expansion, but I suppose, look, you've mentioned this a couple of times. Probably the big challenge we're going to face is what the consumer is willing to pay or able to pay going forward.
Yeah, pretty much in that, and that comes for conventional products as well as organic. And it comes down to what the consumer's willing to pay. They sometimes maybe what the consumer says and how they actually act then when they get to the shop in terms of what they're looking for. They can be very price dictated regardless of what they say, in terms of sustainability or organic or anything else.
Seamus, great getting an update from it today. Look, I'll definitely have you back on later in the year. We'll see how the trade is going. Thanks a lot.
No worries, all here.
We're going to have to leave it there for this episode. I'd like to thank Seamus again for coming on. It's always good to get an update on the market, and good to see that the prospects for Irish lamb are strong again for the coming months. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and get notified of any new episodes.